Welcome back to the Inside the Rink podcast in episode 41. We will cover the Calder Cup playoffs is shaping up. The Oilers eliminate the Stars, and the Panthers eliminate the Hurricanes, which sets the stage for a Stanley Cup Final rematch. The 2025 NHL Draft Combine starts this week. Could there be more draft pick movement in this year's draft? And is Utah a team to watch this offseason? But first, we welcome my co-host, Chris LaValle. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm fantastic. Chaotic week. Finally nice to sit down, relax for a little bit, and let's talk some playoff hockey.
Well, everything considered is what just happened like the last week. It feels like a month has gone by since you and I have sat down and actually recorded something. So it's nice to get back down and kind of ground myself as the start of the week. And it's nice that this lines up right before a series starts, not right in the middle of everything. And like I said, there's a lot shaping up so far. And the one thing I want to point out before we do get into things, Chris, is if you read my season preview, which is way back in like August, September, I had the Oilers going on to win the Stanley Cup. So maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm falling a little short. Who knows? We're going to see. But like, it's always fun to see something kind of pan out in your predictions. So that's a nice little thing I want to touch. But before we get into things, let's hear a word from our sponsor, DraftKings Sportsbook.
DraftKings Sportsbook is Boston's hometown sportsbook. It's live right here in Massachusetts. Bet local on all your favorite sports from the comfort of your own home with DraftKings. To celebrate, all new customers will receive up to $150 in bonus bets when you sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook using code ITR. You can now bet local on money lines, spreads, props, and more with one of America's top-rated sportsbooks. That's DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Sign up with the code ITR to get up to $150 in bonus bets to use now that mobile sports betting is live in Massachusetts. That's code ITR only at DraftKings Sportsbook.
If your loved one is experiencing problems with gambling, call 800-327-5050 or visit helplinema.org to speak with a trained specialist free and confidentially 24/7. Must be 21 plus, physically present in Mass. Eligibility restrictions apply, subject to regulatory licensing requirements. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. Opt-in required. Bonus issued as free bets. Terms at DraftKings.com/M.
That is code ITR at DraftKings Sportsbook. Chris, the Calder Cup playoffs has been it's been very fun to watch. I've watched a lot of the highlights. I don't know where to start because it feels like there's a lot of drama. And one of the big things that happened after Dallas was eliminated, which we're going to get into soon, is Alex Petrovic cleared waivers to actually go back down to the Texas Stars, and that bolsters Texas as they're looking to go on a Calder Cup run.
Yeah, they're going to need it because right now they're down 2-0 to the Canucks. And they're playing game 3 right now, and it's currently tied 1-1. I mean, what? And I'm going to butcher his name. It's Artur Silovs?
I think it's Sealovs or something like that.
Okay, Silovs. Has been lights out. I mean, he just recorded his fifth shutout of the Calder Cup playoffs on, what's today, Monday, so Saturday night in game 2. So that average for Texas series has been really good to watch. Canucks seem like they've been in control. Obviously, right now it's 1-1, but that's, again, I said earlier a while back, what was it, 2 weeks ago we did that podcast where I butchered all the affiliates, and I said it was going to be, I had the same Stanley Cup as the Calder Cup. Obviously didn't work out that way with Dallas being eliminated in the NHL, but Texas is still alive. Tonight's a must-win for them. On the other side, Charlotte is playing the same kind of hockey as their NHL affiliate, the Florida Panthers. That series has been awesome, and it's all Charlotte on that side of things. And they're just putting it right to Laval.
And Laval is like, I looked at that series and how it seems like they ran out of steam at the worst time possible because Charlotte they're taking advantage of Laval running out of steam. And also, it's a health thing. It's like guys might not be completely healthy at this time of the season, given how long things get given how long the season can get when you go so deep into the playoffs. So I think cracks in teams are starting to show, and I'm surprised we didn't see it at the NHL level, but also depth additions and guys who haven't been on those long runs do help bolster. Whereas the AHL, it's more of the same core of players mostly on the lineup. So maybe it's that wear and tear on like Laval that's starting to creep up on them.
Charlotte has just, I mean, ever since that Providence series that was their first round matchup. Providence had a series before, but in their first matchup of the Calder Cup playoffs, they ended up going, I believe, 5, and then they haven't lost since. They've won 7 straight. They're outscoring the Rocket 15-4 in this series, and they've got, and out of those 15 goals, they've come from 9 different players. So they're finding scoring from everywhere.
So it's shaping up nice, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's gonna. I mean, honestly, we'll get to predictions later on. But as for the AHL, the way they've played and the way they look, I like Charlotte to take home the Calder Cup. But right now, between those two series, the two teams leading, they have the 2 top goalies in the playoffs right now, in Seelovs and Capo Kakinen.
Yeah, and Kakinen, given everything is coming from the Moose. I talked about this last week, I believe, but it's nice to see the turnaround he went through, and it all clicked at the right time for him. So maybe he gets back into the NHL next year.
Hopefully.
So you never know. But speaking of the NHL, Stanley Cup Final time on Wednesday. Dallas Stars eliminated by the Edmonton Oilers, who go into their second consecutive Stanley Cup Final against the Florida Panthers. The rematch is set, but Edmonton eliminating Dallas. There's a bit of drama to start the game. Everything happens. Edmonton scores twice on the first 2 shots, and then Jake Ottinger gets pulled. Backup Casey DeSmith comes in, lets in a goal on his second shot. 3 goals on 4 shots, and I tweeted out that it looks like the Dallas Stars have imploded all over the ice because Edmonton took advantage at the right time, and Dallas, it seemed like everything fell apart at the worst possible time. And Chris, I want to talk just very briefly. Do you think it was the right move or the wrong move to pull Ottinger at that time?
That's the question that I think has been asked by everybody who's a Stars fan. 2 shots, 2 goals. Ottinger is one of the best goalies in the world. I mean, honestly, we talked about this with Game 7 of Winnipeg St. Louis, where same thing happened to Connor Hellebuck almost. Not 2 shots, 2 goals, but pretty close to it. And the question was asked, do you pull Hellebuck? And look what happened with Winnipeg. They came back and they won the game. And, obviously Hellebuck turned things around throughout the game. Who says Ottinger, who, to me, honestly, Hellebuck's the best goalie, but Ottinger's right behind him for the best goalie in hockey. And he definitely could have turned it around, I think. So I would have kept him in because of who he is, but it's always, your season's on the line. What do you do?
Exactly. And I think it comes down to DeBoer was looking at this team's season being on the line, and it was mostly a bit of pressure from the season being on the line, and 2, not knowing if the next shot was also going to go in. Now, breaking down the plays, Dallas needed to have a more defensive structure when it came to Edmonton, regardless of if Edmonton scored those 2 goals. They were very sloppy plays, and they hung out Ottinger to dry. So, to me, I think it was an unfair pull of Ottinger right off the bat because 7 minutes in, 2 goals, 2 shots, not the greatest look. But then Dallas doesn't really follow it up throughout the game. They relied on Jason Robertson to be the one to kind of pull them back into the game. Mikko Rantanen, I'm sure you saw the stats, Chris, is no goals, basically no goals and nothing of significance against Edmonton. And just there's a reason why the nickname has started to float back up again, where He's like very streaky. It's streaky Rantanen and all that. So got stuff like that popping back up. The Kadri tweet when he said you keep the dogs, that doesn't look great now because, well, Rantanen wasn't a massive contributor in that Edmonton series, which was a must-win for Dallas. All kidding aside, if Dallas wanted a hope to win the cup, this was probably their best year to do that in the next couple of seasons, given the landscape they are entering with Duchesne and all their pending UFAs. So you look at Edmonton now, back in the Stanley Cup Final, that Canadian Cup drought, it's been a while and that could be looming over. A lot of people have mentioned that it could be a different type of pressure, but historically we have seen that teams are really good at rebounding when going to consecutive Stanley Cup Finals and losing in the first game. The most recent case being Pittsburgh losing in 08-09, and then or losing in the 08 final and then winning in 09. So that's the most recent one. And then there was Montreal and Edmonton who had done it before. So you have that. Take a look at everything surrounding this Florida and Edmonton series now. Florida going to their third consecutive Stanley Cup final. You have a team from the Florida area in 6 consecutive Stanley Cup finals, that's a lot of seasons for one state getting that much hockey. So, but it's going to create a rivalry of its own, given the deep runs these teams have had. And Chris, I really think that it's going to swing the Canadian way. It's going to go north of the border this year, given the historical tendency. And Edmonton, they were one good bounce or one good shot away from tying the game last year. And who knows how Game 7 in overtime could have went.
Yeah, I saw a stat over the weekend that I was undecided on what I was thinking was going to happen in the finals. But I saw this. Wayne Gretzky, his first Stanley Cup appearance, he lost to the New York Islanders. His next one, he beat the New York Islanders to win the cup. Crosby, in his first Stanley Cup appearance, lost to the Red Wings, like you said. They ended up beating him the following year. Now here we are, it's Connor McDavid. Last year lost to the Florida Panthers. I think Edmonton wins the cup this year.
And that's where I'm leaning. And the whole series between the Oilers and the Stars, it felt like a series within a series because there were so many little storylines about secondary scoring, players coming back, and a lot of other things needing to go right and click. And I've mentioned this a couple of times as we've gone through playoffs so far. Everything for Edmonton last year did not click until they got to the Stanley Cup Final and they realized that they were down 3-0. Now they've gotten to the Stanley Cup Final again, but everything is clicking at the right time. You had Stuart Skinner in like a 4 or 5 game span where he only allowed like 2 goals. And there was 3 shutouts in there, or I think it was a very, very low scoring span against Stuart Skinner. But players who elevate themselves in the playoffs, that goes to show you what this team saw in Skinner when they didn't trade for another goaltender at the deadline.
Yep.
Because he took them there. He took them to the Stanley Cup Final last year. Why wouldn't you run that same goaltender and see if you can do it a second year? So, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking, right, and people I've seen a couple places, but I'm trying to do the math. They're ever since they lost the first 2 games in the first round to the Kings, they've only lost twice ever since then. And I'm trying to figure out the record. I think it's 12-2. That sounds right?
Wow.
Because they won 4 straight after going down 0-2, and then they won 4-4. So yeah, 12-2 since losing the first 2 games to the Kings in the first round.
And just Edmonton has kicked it into a new gear this playoffs, and I don't see the series being short against Florida, but I don't see it necessarily being a very long series. And you got to look at just how hard and intense Florida plays. They roll all 4 lines. They're very short shifts, but they're hitting you. They are swarming you constantly, and they're trying to knock you off the puck. Their play style is incredibly physical, but it's also admirable from a coaching perspective. You got to look at could two and now 3 Stanley Cup appearances for that team, could that be a bit of wear and tear for them?
We keep talking about this every week and every week. And the only series I think I picked them to win was the Tampa series. But you talked about it multiple times where the wear and tear of 3 Stanley Cup runs, 3 long seasons, when does it catch up to them? And it doesn't seem like it might.
Yeah. And if it's not this year, maybe we don't see that for the next couple of years. And if Florida wins this Stanley Cup, Chris, this could also be an ultimately catastrophic prediction of mine. I really think if Florida goes back to back, they might win 2 or 3 more in very short succession.
I think they very well could, but we also know how hard it is to get there, where that next year might be the year the wear and tear comes in if they win the Cup this year.
Well, look at what Tampa did after back-to-back years.
They lost to Colorado.
Cup wins. Yeah. Colorado that year was also firing. They were not going to lose.
Right. And so maybe that's if Florida wins again, somebody figures it out and adds the right pieces. I mean, there's a lot of pieces available in the offseason.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. And speaking of Florida, eliminating Carolina, it looked like it was going to be a series sweep. Then Carolina finally snaps the drought and wins 1 game in the Eastern Conference Final, pardon me. Their first since 2006 when they won the Cup that year. So I saw a lot of people saying, it could be a potential reverse sweep. Once Florida lost one, it was. I don't want to say it was going to be a guarantee, but it seemed like it was a done deal that it was not going to be an easy game for Carolina.
No, and that's one thing about the Panthers on their aspect is they adapt to you defensively. Like they figure out your play style and they shut you down, and that's what they did with Carolina. Is same as they did a couple of years ago. They figure out how Carolina plays, and they shut it down, and Carolina just seemed to disappear. Except for the 1 game they won where they were able to attack Florida in different ways and find a way to win that game. But losing, what was it game 5 that they ended up blowing, or was it game 3 that I'm thinking of, where they were up 2-0, and then all of a sudden it was like Florida just couldn't stop scoring.
I think it might be game 3 you're thinking of.
Yeah.
But anyways, one thing I want to say about game 4 is that game was also a very heavily goaltending. It was a very heavy goaltending game from both teams because 2 goals were scored on empty net, whereas 1 wasn't. So the other thing that I want to say is Carolina's a team that needs another top piece. And that's coming a little more apparent as the offseason approaches because they can't seem to get over that hump. They're a good enough team to get to the conference finals, but when do they start to look at external help, not internal?
Yeah.
Because running that same group back is not doing them favors.
And nothing against Freddie Anderson. Like I said, he had been lights out most of the playoffs. But do they also look at the goalie situation and maybe do something there? Maybe it is Kochetkov takes over the net. There's names we've talked about. Like I could see a piece like John Gibson going to the Hurricanes if they decide to make him available in Anaheim. I mean, there's questions to be made or to be had in Carolina of what to do to get over that hump and finally get back to the Stanley Cup Finals.
Yeah. And why wouldn't you run a goaltending tandem that worked well for Anaheim years ago now? And that was Anderson and Gibson. Why wouldn't you do that? Sure, they were both a lot younger, but why wouldn't you do it?
It's not a bad idea. I mean, again, there's multiple names out there. Definitely need scoring. That's definitely a thing that I think they got to figure out.
And for Carolina, it's not secondary scoring. They need a top scorer.
Yes.
And that's not a knock on Svechnikov, Aho, Stankoven. Either one of those players has to stand out significantly, like this next season, and then solidify themselves in that role, or Carolina needs to look externally and bring that guy in.
Yep.
And maybe they end up with two as, say, Stankoven becomes a monster for scoring. Because it could very well happen.
Yeah.
You never know. But with that being said, Carolina eliminated in 5 games. A lot of people thought it was going to be 4, but it wasn't, which leaves us with the Edmonton Oilers versus Florida Panthers. I don't know if you want to call this the reunion tour for the Stanley Cup Final or rematch, whatever you want to call it, but it's going to, like we're kind of already alluding to a lot of good points and whatnot, the rematch, but this is like, say if the Oilers lose again and they don't touch or sniff a Stanley Cup Final again, this is going to be like, say, okay, let me go back to this. Say if the Edmonton Oilers do not go to the Stanley Cup Final after this year and McDavid retires as an Oiler. This run, it will be like the GMs of this team, it'll be a hindsight of why wouldn't they sell the farm? Like, why wouldn't you go out and get that help now when you have arguably some of the best players in the world on your team, if not the best players in the world on your team? Those are legitimate things people bring up.
Well, they talk about this year as like, well, they were missing Zach Hyman, injuries, the aspect like we talked about coming into the playoffs, all the injuries they had. Now we won't know until this series is over whether they win or lose. You'll hear the list of injuries that they're playing with. Like, who knows how bad Draisaitl's injury was? McDavid had his injuries and he played. Like, again, even if they win or lose, you're going to get that list of injuries. And that might be the thing they talk about is that was the year they should have won. This was their year, but McDavid was hurt with this and Draisaitl was hurt with this, and they lost Hyman in the conference finals. And if they had another goalie, this seems like the year for
And
Edmonton.
that's a very legitimate thing to bring up too, because you never know until the series is over what's going to happen given a player going down. And that's the other thing, is looking at the standpoint of teams with a lot of depth. The Oilers have adequate depth, but in this case, when a Zach Hyman goes down, guys have to move up to go into the roles. Why, like, at the trade deadline, sure, Trent Frederick has been great, but he hasn't made a massive impact for the Oilers like I guess he would be expected to have made if he was a bigger fish.
Yep.
Like, the little things like that. Like, guys have to move up when other players go down. And then they're expected to perform to a different standard. So it's a lot of, this injury and these factors. But it's also, look at what the GMs could have done to put a better team around Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl heading into the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Yep.
While that is hindsight being 2020, I think it's a legitimate point.
And right now, based on the lines from what I'm seeing on Daily Faceoff, Nugent Hopkins, McDavid, and Corey Perry are the top line. The second line's Kane, Draisaitl, and Kapanen. And then everything kind of fills out. The third and fourth line, I kind of think they tinker with throughout the next couple of days of practice before game one.
Yeah.
But Frederick is on the fourth line with Jeff Skinner and Adam Henrique.
Yeah. And see, now that's where you're running into, like, okay, Frederick was brought in. They had the high hopes for him. As I'm sure the Oilers brought him in, and given he was also injured when they acquired him. So there's that thing to consider. They had high hopes for him when he was healthy or healthy enough to return. So
now, could Connor Brown return this series, or is he done?
quick little fact check Google search will tell me Connor Brown. They will otherwise be fully healthy when the NHL's Ultimate Series kicks off at Rogers Place on Wednesday night. Connor Brown, who missed the 2 final games of the Western Conference Final against Dallas Stars, skated on Sunday and will play Game 1. He confirmed.
So there's another tinker to the line. So we'll see what it looks like come for Game 1. But that's another nice piece. I think they're going to have somebody's going to have to sit that's healthy. But that's a depth thing again.
Yep.
You lose Hyman, you can add in not to the play level, but you can add in Connor Brown. Something goes wrong, you slide somebody out, and whoever Brown replaced, they slide in. Like, they have the pieces to mix and move right now.
Yeah, and that's like the Oilers, they have those pieces for those reasons. And I completely forgot Corey Perry's having the ultimate Stanley Cup playoff run this year. And even the last few years, like, side note, 5 Stanley Cup finals. And the guy's 40. He's been in 6 in his career. Won the first one in his rookie season with Anaheim in 2007.
Yeah.
Then you go to Montreal or Dallas, Montreal, and then he was against Tampa back to back. Went to Tampa to try to win
with Colorado,
and then Edmonton, and then now Edmonton. So I also put out the other morning that players would kill for that kind of consistency, even to get to the Stanley Cup final.
Right.
And win or lose, like, obviously these guys don't want to lose, but getting to that level and knowing what it takes to get there, that's experience you can bring to other teams and bring to the table. So Corey Perry being 40 and having that under his belt, he's obviously proven that he can still go. And this whole Stanley Cup playoff run, he's done just that. So,
yeah, I'm in the aspect of I want Corey Perry to win the cup this year. I want Edmonton
me
to.
too.
I think we're just both on board. Edmonton's to win the cup this year.
Now, speaking of being both on board, I want to hear your prediction. How many games do you think this is going to go?
I think it's going to go 7.
You think it's going to go 7?
I think it goes 7. It's 2 teams that are physical, that have offensive talent to score, and it's not going to be like what was last year, 3-0, and then Edmonton won 3 straight to force a Game 7. Yeah. I could see this being it's tough. I think 7, yeah. I just think Edmonton's got the power, and McDavid's playing at such a high level compared to what he did last. The guy is unbelievable, but watching what he's done so far in these playoffs, it's all Edmonton, and I think Florida can match, and that's why I think it goes 7 games. And of course, Bobrovsky.
Yeah. Now, here is where I'm going to chime in. I have 2 answers to this. I don't see this series going an even 4 or 6. I can see it going 5 or 7. I don't see the Oilers winning the cup in Florida. I just cannot see that happening. If they're going to win the cup, they're going to do it in 5 or 7. Obviously, they don't really care if they're going to win in 6.
Right.
But Florida, this is going to be a series where unless Edmonton can continue that stretch where they say if they lose Game 1 and go on a tear again, if they continue that, maybe Edmonton is the team to beat this year. But if Florida can do what they've done throughout the entire Stanley Cup playoffs, is right after a loss, they bounce back and they play arguably their best game of the entire playoffs. That's another big hurdle for Edmonton to kind of deal with. Now, these are 2 teams that are rebounding well. One team really well in comparison. It's a lot of me is looking at it saying I see this being 1 on, 1 off, 1 on, 1 off. But that 12-2 or 12-3 or whatever you said earlier, that's why I'm just like, okay, Edmonton seems like they're just too good going into this Stanley Cup Finals, and they had an adequate amount of rest. They didn't get too much, but they got an adequate amount of rest. So maybe they could become too much for Florida this year, whereas Florida was too much for them last year.
And I think if Edmonton's going to win the cup and get the Canada off the schneid of not winning cups, it needs to be done at home.
Yep.
I think that's the most storybook and fitting way to do it.
Then all things considering, and this is nothing knocking on the Florida crowd, is when they announced Connor McDavid as the winner of the Conn Smythe last year, he got booed.
Yeah.
As granted, there was a lot of other players you could realistically argue that could have won it, like Bobrovsky, Barkov, Kachuk. A lot of good players that were on that list. McDavid wins it, doesn't come out. That was a whole controversial thing at the time, but now this year it could be a different story. Maybe he wins. Maybe they win the cup again, the Oilers, and McDavid wins the Conn Smythe again.
Mm-hmm.
So, you never know where things are going, and I'm gonna say final. I think it's going to be 7 games, and it's going to be 1-on, 1-off, back and forth wins.
I could see it. I mean, I just somehow I think I wouldn't be surprised. I guess I would say the same. Because I would say Edmonton goes up 2-0 at home. Florida ties it up at home 2-2. Maybe the home teams just win the whole way.
Yeah, like you got to sprinkle an overtime or two in there somewhere, but
right, yeah.
But Chris, it's a lot of stuff in the books when it comes to the playoffs. Teams that are preparing for the off season. Now that's 30 teams. The count grows every time we do a podcast, obviously, but nature of the playoffs, one team has to win, one team has to, or 31 other teams have to lose. So the NHL Draft Combine is starting this week. There's a lot of good storylines coming out of it so far, and the first being the chatter surrounding the Combine due to it being the last event that teams are together to talk about potential off-season moves. That's a really good point that I was listening to on my drive back home from work. Because say if a team wants to hammer out something in person or the frameworks of a larger deal for the off season, that's the last time you could realistically meet in person where teams are going to a central location. I'm iffy that it would happen like that because a lot of the talk about going to a decentralized draft format was because of the everything's so everybody's together and it wasn't a lot of time away or kind of in your own central area. So that's talk for that. But the other big storyline to come out of this is the CHL NCAA player impacts after the new rules. Is a great chance for media to talk to prospects about the rule change and how that's going to affect where they're going, how they want to pursue professional hockey. But the other thing is, it's also a great avenue with this new rule changes. Say if a player is not doing well in NCAA, they can go right over to the WHL and vice versa. They don't got to take that year off and all that. So, bit more options, and a lot of players are obviously going over to the NCAA from the CHL and all that. But you're going to start to see once other players are either losing spots or not being able to play up to expectations, say in the NCAA, you're going to see kind of players go back or players who were kind of pushed down the depth chart or out of a role that they were comfortable playing in. They're going to go to a team where they can either play up to a higher role or get that role back, say in the CHL.
Yep.
So that's a really good thing. And I don't know if any Red Wings prospects have done any sort of flip-flop in between CHL and NCAA. Nothing yet on Jets side or that I've seen today at least. But you got a lot of possibilities with this. And finally, or no, that was my last point, the CHL one. But my last point that I want to bring up before we go down, the draft pick, there's a lot of chatter. Elliot Friedman brought it up on 32 Thoughts today, is there could be a lot of movement, or some more movement than we're used to in the first round of the 2025 NHL entry draft, which is in Los Angeles this year. It's the first decentralized draft. It's rather unheard of that teams try to trade off their pick, especially when it's in the top 5. Teams like the Sharks, this is something David Pagnotta brought up on his show, and he even wrote about it, that teams like the Sharks could want Schaefer and potentially make a deal with the Islanders for the first overall draft selection. These are like realistic things, because if you look at the Islanders, you got Pelech, Dobson, Romanov, like you got good defensemen in there and a good core group of guys on your blue line. So unless they're trading a Romanov or Dobson off because the price is too high and they like what they see in Schaefer, it doesn't make sense for the Islanders to pick up another defenseman in this draft. Whereas you look at the centers in this draft, it's a very deep center draft, especially for defensive-minded centers or two-way centers. Like you got good guys. Then you got guys like Porter Martone and Michael Misa, guys who have skyrocketed this year. Like Misa went in over 130 points, and he looked exceptional throughout the entire year. You also got bigger players like Roger McQueen, who's standing at 6'5", and he's been scrutinized throughout the whole year because he didn't play probably 75% of his season, and gets back in for playoffs, has to get medically cleared for the scouting combine. So he's going to be there's going to be more of a lens on him because of, given his injury history this year, and also not a lot of looks for him in a physical sense on the ice. And that's what teams are looking at when it comes to these players. Yes, sure, you can do X amount of pull-ups, bench press this, sprint a mile, all this sort of stuff they do at the scouting combine. But how does that apply to the player on the ice? Well, you'll get a good general sense when it comes to all of this physical fitness, but without a large majority of the tape, there's that 50-50. You almost feel like you're rolling the dice.
One name I really want to watch at the Combine is James Higgins. I watched him. I went to a UMass Lowell BC game, and I watched him play, and I like his play. And actually, a team that I think he'd be interesting for is a team that we're going to get to in a couple minutes, but the Utah Mammoth. I think he'd be a nice piece to that roster. I mean, I could see him going to the Flyers. I think they're 6, but that's my one name to watch.
Yeah, and Chris, we'll talk about Utah in a second. I don't see Utah holding on to their pick. I don't see them being one of the teams that holds on to where they are. Their owners are known to be, they like to go and make moves and make themselves known. Like I said, we'll get into that in a bit. But given the talent that's around this draft, why wouldn't they try to make the move if it's available? So a lot of things being said when it comes to this draft. Teams might just want to bolster their current draft capital for this year by cutting deals and or even bolster future draft capital outside of this draft. Why wouldn't you say, oh, this team wants to move up, and you can go down, say, 7 spots and get a couple of other draft picks later, say 3rd, 4th, and 5th round picks, things like that. Because realistically, or arguably, as you can look at those 3rd, 4th, and 5th round picks, a lot of players that come out of those may not be top tier talent, but maybe a team is looking to develop a guy into a depth role and become a good depth guy.
I'm confused by the tweet from Kevin Weeks.
Oh. Kevin
see it?
Weeksbaum?
He just put the eye emoji with a picture of outside of American Airlines Arena.
Uh-oh.
Could be
Could
something.
this be a Pete DeBoer firing?
That's what I'm wondering.
I
don't know.
was going to bring it up as a possibility, and then I was looking at the realistic outcome of it, and he's historically known to be hard on goaltenders.
What's coming?
Something's coming, but you just don't know what.
I also was wondering, I don't think we talked about it, but was curious if they were to move Ottinger in the offseason.
Brand new $8.25 million deal. Got the term on there. Maybe a team wants to make the swap.
Red Wings. Oh, sorry. Excuse me.
But you never know. I'm a little thrown off now after the Kevin Weeks thing. I'm not going to lie. But given everything, getting back to my draft stuff here quick, teams may be more comfortable making bigger deals in a decentralized draft format. Obviously, we're going to see how that plays out this summer, but historically with the draft, look at last year when Sergachev got traded right at the draft. That was a huge shock to a lot of people, but maybe there will be bigger moves than just that. So the other thing I want to bring up, and this has been something I wrote an article about it a while ago, and now it's starting to pick up more steam with bigger reporters. Elliot Friedman mentioned it today. Pagnotta mentioned it. Frank Saravalli has been talking about it for about a couple of weeks now. Like, big names are talking about it, that the NHL is most likely to return to a centralized draft format after Bill Daly made a statement, and this is coming off of what Elliot Friedman is reporting, that it has been said that it's been realized the decentralized format was a mistake. The wording is what intrigues me, is when they say it was a mistake, not is a mistake. They're talking about it as if it's already happened. So here's where I start to think that, hey, maybe they've already put the plans in place for the next CBA or the next draft, I guess, because they flipped it at the end of this CBA. Maybe they go back and it's centralized. Each team has to have X amount of required representatives, but they split it, and it's not such a big travel thing. Because I know that was one of the big points for teams when it comes to this stuff, was it's a lot of travel, a lot of time to get set up and such and such. So maybe they cut a little bit of stuff and cut around the edges to make teams happy while continuing a centralized draft format. I was at what is currently the last centralized draft in Vegas, which was an experience by itself. But I'm curious on how a decentralized draft is going to work. We got till the end of the month, and if they return to the centralized, it's great for the players and it's great for people who watch it, because realistically, Chris, the NHL entry draft, it's a spectacle on top of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, every single year they go above and beyond. Nothing will top the Vegas one, obviously, but it's been a NHL spectacle for forever.
Yeah.
So, and finally, my last point, Utah. Could Utah be a team to watch this offseason? Chris, I'm saying yes, because there's a few big free agency names, none bigger than Mitch Marner, but there's currently a pending unrestricted free agent at the time of recording this on the Winnipeg Jets that I seriously could see ending up as a Utah Mammoth, and that's Nikolai Ehlers.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of names linked to Utah this offseason.
Yeah. And getting back to what I was saying earlier, is their owner, I should say, they're known in the NBA side of things to make big splashes and make sure they are known and that they're involved.
And seeing what they did last year, like being that close to a playoff spot. I watch the Pat McAfee show some days when I'm at work, and they have the owner of the Jazz and Mammoth on sometimes, and he mentioned that they saw what they did last year. The new logo is absolutely sick. Like they're gonna want to make moves to put a big name in that sweater that is gonna make them a lot better and get it back into the playoffs. I mean, obviously they have the storyline of the Coyotes because the franchise just moved there, but they want to get back into the playoffs and make a deep run.
And that's exactly what it is. And maybe they also want to get in the playoffs and give their younger guys set experience. We talked about that previously, like Ottawa way back when, is get the teams in. We even talked about it with Detroit. Get the guys in, get the experience, get the reps in, and then finally build around that team that has experience in and veteran guys coming in who's either won cups or been deep into the playoffs and go from there. Maybe that's what Utah is looking to do. So we're going to see how this plays out. And the off season, like I said, it's always long, but that'll do it for today's podcast. Chris, I enjoy doing this. I enjoy talking hockey, and I'll see you next week.